Third down and 20.
Frank, how about you kick us off with the value of the running back position?
All right. So running backs, to me, in Superflex Dynasty leagues are like the most volatile position to hold for multiple seasons. Not saying that receivers and other positions aren't volatile. It's just if you look at the running back rankings from 2 years ago, some of the guys at their draft positions, it almost seems laughable now how much they've risen or completely sunk off of a cliff in value, and like insane amounts of value. Like obviously that happens for quarterbacks and receivers and tight ends. It's just the cliff of the running back when it hits. It is crazy. And now it also works for going up too, though, because when a running back, like a third round pick, if they start playing and doing well, their value instantly shoots up huge amounts. Just look at Antonio Gibson, for example, even though he was like a second round rookie pick. But you get the point. Like they're just a volatile position to hold in dynasty leagues. Do you agree or disagree with that? Let's just get a baseline.
Yeah, I mean, look at the easiest example to point to, and I know injuries are involved, though, is look at the Rams backfield with Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson. Cam Akers was being drafted as a top 10 running back. There are people making a case that he was a top 5 dynasty running back to own. Then tears his Achilles, drops all the way down out of like the top 30, I think, at one point. And then Darrell Henderson shoots up. You're not going to find that in another position. Like, I mean, look at Cortland Sutton last year. He tore his ACL. Jerry Jeudy didn't go shooting up the list. Quarterback would probably be the only one that you can argue, but even then it's, Dak Prescott breaks his ankle. Ben DiNucci isn't all of a sudden becoming a highly coveted thing. Like, you're just bidding fab on him. Or Andy Dalton, you're trading fourths. So, yeah, it is the most volatile position. It makes no-name people all of a sudden become very relevant. That's my take on it. It's super volatile.
Yeah. Well, Jake brought up a point a couple episodes ago where you were saying, I mean, rookie quarterbacks, they could have a poor first year, right? I don't think Tua is the best example, but it is the most recent example of a quarterback going out and to a certain extent underperforming the expectations, at least compared to the peers drafted around him. I think we can all agree on that. He still has not lost like any value. Maybe he lost a smidge of value, but it's so small that it really isn't going to kill your dynasty team.
Correct. I mean, quarterbacks, they keep their value for at least probably the first 2 years. I mean, we saw in our, rebuild league, the orphan team that we took over, we were able to trade Sam Darnold and get a first-round pick. I don't think that happens with any other position, especially not running backs. And like receivers, they also maintain value just because they're guys that can play longer. The average lifespan of a running back is not that long. Even the top ones, you can look at a guy like Todd Gurley, who was the running back one in dynasty leagues for about a season, and then next thing you know, he's out of the league. That just goes back to Frank's point of if you look at running back rankings, like 2 years ago, they're completely different, and they're the most volatile position, I think, of any position in fantasy football by far. I don't think it's even really close.
Well, see, I don't want to get too far into this because I'll circle back to this, but I don't necessarily hugely agree that the top running backs are always incredibly volatile. I think running backs in general can be, but it's not like there aren't running backs that don't last a long time. But we'll get into that argument later. I think you're right, though. Top running backs have a huge chance of completely falling out. So let's get into the startup draft first before we get into the value, because that's kind of the way we did with the receivers. I figured we'll do it the same with the running backs. Because running backs are so incredibly volatile, I will never overpay for a running back in a startup draft, and I will always try to find good value picks for the running backs that I take. And this does not mean two things. It does not mean that I'm completely a zero RB kind of a guy. That's not what it means by find running backs for value and don't overpay for running backs. And it doesn't mean to necessarily avoid the tippy top running backs, because if you look at the RB1 in fantasy football has been a top 7 consensus redraft pick for the last 5 years, right? So it's not necessarily rocket science in terms of who's going to be the top running back. I mean, the past 4 out of 5 years, and Todd Gurley was the other one that was not that 5th year, and he was still a top 2 round consensus pick. It's not like the fantasy community is terrible at pinpointing who the tippy top running backs are. It's mainly just injuries and some of those upside plays that are the problem. And I think that that's kind of getting into the last point, at least that I have, before we start really getting into a debate here. I just think that the overall rules do not get cute with the running back position. If you have that late first round, early second round turn of a startup, I'm not getting cute and being the guy last year that's drafted Miles Sanders. I think we could all at least learn from, like, why are we taking these insanely high risk running backs over the tippy top receivers or like a top whatever receiver, or mainly the top quarterbacks, if like a Russell Wilson is on the board or whoever, right? Or even maybe one of the top tight ends. I firmly believe in the startup draft, I'm so fine with landing a singular Aaron Jones in the third or fourth round, or just that one stable, hey, I got him at a good value pick. I know that this guy is going to produce. Whether how long he produces, I don't know. But I get a guy that I know at the end of the day for the next season or two is going to be an elite running back. And that's what I mean by draft running back for values and don't overpay. Drafting Christian McCaffrey at pick 7 is not overvaluing and overpaying for run. That's a phenomenal pick. He's a cheat code. It's just, am I going to draft Christian McCaffrey pick 3? No shot, because I'd much rather just have the top probably 4 quarterbacks. At pick 5, I think that's when you get a good value on Christian McCaffrey, and that's how I treat running backs. Draft the elite guys, but don't overpay, because that's how you can really shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, the point that you touched on right there that I'd like to extend off is like Christian McCaffrey is literally the only single running back that I feel confident about this year. And even then, it's like, I mean, I guess he can get hurt, but if you're looking at that with every player, like every player can get hurt. Like anyone can tear their ACL, anyone can break their leg. You don't know what's going to happen. But Christian McCaffrey, of all of those top running backs that are getting drafted, he's the only one that I feel confident is going to actually perform and play to his, expectations this year. And if you can get him at 7, that's fine. I kind of think that he will likely go higher in most Superflex leagues, which I'm not touching at that price. But then once you get beyond that, I have Jonathan Taylor in our league. I'm not taking Jonathan Taylor over the likes of Joe Burrow in a startup. Joe Burrow is probably like the 7th, 8th quarterback, maybe even 9th. Like, I want those quarterbacks. If I'm picking in the later end of the first round, I would love to get those quarterbacks at the 1-2 turn and then go and search for my running backs or wide receivers, because there are some good upside guys in that, early third, mid third kind of thing. My guy that I always talk about, DeAndre Swift, has definitely fallen into that kind of area at this point. There are other young running backs. We have Javonte Williams is way lower than that. Like, you could pick up a Javonte later on, and we saw how he looked in preseason. We'll touch on it later. I don't know how much longer he's going to be staying down there, especially with Melvin Gordon being injured too. I'm kind of tipping stuff here though. So, but with that though, like, it's very easy for me to go in startups and just quarterback 1-2. Like, I have my cornerstone 2 pieces that I feel super confident about. And then, I know this is about the running back position, but I'm okay missing out on the likes of the Derrick Henrys and Alvin Kamaras and Dalvin Cooks for those later guys, just because I know what I have with me in Joe Burrow and Russell Wilson, for example.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because us as a pod that we're very much on the quarterback 1-2 kind of strategy here. Just get your quarterbacks, get your base, get your foundation, set yourself up for the future, and you'll figure out everything later. I think that's how a lot of us approach a startup draft, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because if you even like guys like David Montgomery and like guys along those lines where you can get them in rounds 4 through 6, something like that. Chris Carson, you could probably get in round 8, 9. Like, those guys are going to be productive fantasy backs for the next 2 seasons, and you could figure it out as you go. But on the other hand, I know this isn't about quarterbacks and receivers. Those guys are almost harder to find, in my opinion, at least the top end ones, just because, and those guys last longer. So you can figure out the running backs as they're so volatile that they're going to be coming in and out, swapping in and out throughout the year. So you'll be able to figure it out as you go.
But here's the main point that I really like to drive with running backs, though, because JT, you brought up DeAndre Swift, which I think is actually a pretty good example, not for me personally, but for people in general. If you really think that DeAndre Swift is the best running back since sliced bread, and he has that elite level upside, and you think that his floor is way higher than it is priced right now, go ahead and draft him. If you value him as a first-round starter pick, drafting him in the second round is a good pick. I'm not saying to necessarily don't avoid all running backs. It's just if you start stacking running backs, because I did this in one league, in one Dynasty Superflex startup ever. Now, I'm not saying that it's a guaranteed fail. You can do it, and it has tons of upside. It's just the risk involved compared to just, to me, drafting safer earlier on. 4th round, 5th round, whatever. Draft for all the upside you want in your running backs. Javonte Williams is the dude I will be drafting if he's there in the 4th, because I've heard that. But I'm not going to be the dude that's like, Alvin, I'm going to win this year. Alvin Kamara pick 6. We're doing it, boys. He was the RB1 last year. No, this is a dynasty league. I'm building for 5 years outlook with my first 2 or 3 picks.
I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. You don't win in the first 2 rounds, but you could certainly lose.
Exactly.
Don't lose in the first 2 rounds, first 3 rounds even. Play it safer in those rounds. The rounds you hit the home runs are later on. And I think that's a lot of times, like Frank said, where you find your value picks. You find the guys that you like and you target them and you go get them. But in the early rounds, play it safe. Get your quarterbacks, get your receivers, guys that are going to last you longer. That's just my opinion on the way startups should go with running backs.
Here's the other thing with running backs. Real quick. Sorry to cut you off, JT.
Mm-hmm.
I think that putting together we're putting together overall dynasty rankings. Spoiler alert. Now that I'm constructing my rankings, I personally think that running backs are also just overpriced. At least a lot of them, not all of them. There are definitely deals that you can get every year. But someone like David Montgomery might be a decent example. Maybe he's not the best because I like David Montgomery, but I don't love David Montgomery. The fact of the matter is that once the league gets going, there are players in the startup draft 30 to 20 picks after David Montgomery that you only really have to add a 2nd round pick to make that trade for a lot of owners in leagues. And that's the problem that I have with a lot of the running backs is why am I going to stack running backs when once the startup draft is over and we get 3 weeks into the season, I can trade someone that I took 3 rounds after him on top of a 2nd round pick and get him. That the value doesn't match up to me.
With those middle guys, I feel like, yeah. But good luck trying to pry Antonio Gibson or Jonathan Taylor from the people that have them hands. Those guys are just they're young, very high potential running backs. They're on my team. I'm not trading them unless I'm getting massive overpay. So it is
but
give or take.
There's a lot of risk because that was Josh Jacobs. That was Miles Sanders.
True.
That was Joe Mixon.
I'm not saying it's a good strategy, but yeah.
You need to make a fine line in the sand between running backs that I think are insanely elite, Hall of Fame level potential, dudes that are just carries. Because these are the guys that can actually last a while. You look at data from Hall of Fame level running backs, they have 7-8 year careers like receivers do. It's just you need to really be confident that they are that level or else you can massively take the bait. And like Jake said, instead of winning the startup draft, you instantly shoot yourself in the foot. Not saying that stacking running backs is impossible to win, and it's a great strategy if it pans out. You probably win a ton of value. But I just think that drafting the other positions, especially early, unless they are elite level running backs, is just much more profitable and consistent if you want to compete in every draft that you do. Let's move on from the startup. Actually, any last points on running backs in the startup?
No, the only thing is a very popular one is the 0 RB strategy. And I get it. I get that you're really stacking your other positions. But
I really don't mind it. I'm not.
You can't neglect running backs though. You can't.
I'm not saying. I personally prefer the I've seen it called like the modified zero running back strategy, where you take one of them and then you can neglect them on and take a bunch of upside plays
but if
later
you're doing
in the
that,
draft.
How are you passing up on Javonte in the 5th? If you already took a running back in the 3rd and you see Javonte sitting there, juicy right in the 5th round, you got this elite level.
He's not going to be there for much longer.
He was earlier in the season. If you're just like, well, guess what? I'm doing modified 1R, 0RB, expert level fantasy strats that I saw on Twitter. No shot. Give me receiver random ass motherfucker instead of a prime juicy RB1.
Javonte. I don't know where this came from.
I don't know where that came from either.
I don't know. Frank feels some kind of way about Javonte, but
the thing is though, like if you're doing a 0 RB, like you better make sure you go out and get the likes of Damian Harris in those later rounds, like James Conner. There's only a couple good, like I guess Chase Edmonds, if you like Chase Edmonds. I don't like Chase Edmonds. But there's only a couple there's only a couple like even appealing names in those later rounds.
No, if you are doing a legit 0 RB, you need two things. You need to walk your ass to the nearest whatever religion you are and go prayer for a little bit, and then you need to get a voodoo doll and start poking holes in all the starting running backs that you drafted the backups of. That's what you need to do.
Me and my little Najee Harris voodoo doll.
Is either you're
getting Sunday morning.
Connors and James Robinsons, or you're just getting all the backups are just hitting because you're just pinching knees with your voodoo doll.
Obviously, if I'm not passing up on value, I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. Is they go in saying I'm going to do this, and then they don't let the draft change them. They just say they stick in their ways. Which if the draft's falling some kind of way, and you have Javonte sitting there in the 5th round. You take him. It's pretty obvious. Like that's the thing I think people let get to their head is they go in with the strategy. They go. I mean, I'm for it. We all love Javonte on this pod, and I think we'll hit on it in news and notes. So I don't want to go too far. But he looked really good in week 1 of the preseason. I know it's preseason, but he looked really good. Anyways, I don't think I have anything else to say.
I have one very last thing. Like, just don't fall into that ADP trap. I mean, my example is going to be Zeke Elliott, who, from what I've seen in startups, prior to Hard Knocks, where I think he's going to get a little bit of a Hard Knocks boost, but prior to Hard Knocks, he would fall. It would say like his ADP is like, I don't know, I'll just give a round number of like 20, and we could be at like pick 40, and he's not getting drafted, and you might be looking at Zeke, and you might be going, he's an ADP of 20. I'm picking him at 40. That's great value. But if you look at your actual big board that you made before the draft, he might be picked 50. So, just follow what your own consensus is. Don't go by the actual consensus, because then you're letting other people do the draft for you. You're letting people let those guys slide, and you're picking them up, and they might not actually be worth what you're picking them up at to you.
Yep, it's similar to what we said about rookie drafts. Do your research, be prepared, and know what you're doing. Don't let the draft play you. You got to be there and do your own thing.
Yeah, right. So moving on to our news and notes.
I have one last point. Yep. No. First off, we have to touch on after the startup draft, Mr. JT.
Oh, gotcha.
There's one more bullet point. Look at the doc, bro.
I was looking at the doc. I skipped ahead. My bad.
Crap, now I forgot what I was going to say. All right,
yeah, that's right.
Move on to
that's right.
advantages and disadvantages compared to wide receivers. This is the last bullet point we have on this section. Basically, because we did the value wide receivers last podcast, and now we're doing the value running backs, obviously. So we can talk about it a little bit after the startup draft. After the startup draft, I think that the value of running backs is actually relatively fair, because after the startup draft, it seems like those veteran running backs become a lot more attainable, and you don't have to pour the insane amount of assets to get these guys. I think Derrick Henry might be a decent example in a lot of leagues. There are leagues right now that you could probably pick him up for a singular first-round pick. Probably not most, but there probably is a league where that's happened. At least 3, I would say. You do a first and a second, and all of a sudden the wheels are really starting to turn for some owners, especially if they're not a competitor. But how do we value running backs compared to receivers? What are the advantages and disadvantages, and what do you think is more of like a carry for you guys?
So I think after the startup draft, running backs are kind of, to me, what separate those contending teams from the rebuilding teams, just because of what we touched on earlier in their volatility. Those contenders are willing to go out and pay for those elite level running backs that the Derrick Henrys of the world that may not be around in 2 or 3 years because they're going for the championship. So I think that is what's different to me than receivers, is where even if you're a contender, you can get away with having Odell and Jarvis Landry and guys in that category as your, receiver 2 and 3, and maybe even flex play, like whatever it is to you. You can get away with that as a wide receiver because they're going to put up decent value. But if those running back slots don't meet, if you don't have at least one elite running back, you're likely not a contender. And that's just that. So I think running backs in general, those very top ones, are obviously priced accordingly, and they are going to cost you a lot to get. But that's what wins you championships. So,
yeah, I also think that there's a stigma against drafting running backs in the startup draft, not in the startup draft, in the rookie draft when you're a rebuilding team, that I don't necessarily agree with, because yes, it's more risky, and running backs, for the most part, have a shorter shelf life than wide receivers. But I think that if you're going into a rookie draft and worrying about a guy's last snap of his career, that's just kind of a stupid thing to do. You guys picking on and putting down there, like you're worrying about how long a shelf life a guy has before he ever plays a snap, assuming no crazy injury history.
I understand what you're saying, but I definitely think that has to play in. Like, if you're a team that is not going to compete for 2 or 3 years, why are you taking a running back that in 2 or 3 years might be,
it's about the value, though.
Yeah, but
it's about how much risk you want to take on, because the upside play is crazy. If that running back pans out and becomes a top 5 dude, you could sell him for a ton.
Sure. In a Superflex league, though, my thing is, I'll take this year for an example. I mean, I can't prove it. We don't know what the actual running backs are going to do this year. But I'm passing on Najee Harris at a 105, 106 price. But when I'm looking at Javonte Williams at a 110 price, a 109, wherever he's going, a little bit later on, that is where I see the value, because I do value Javonte Williams significantly more than Najee Harris. So I'm not going to draft a Najee Harris right there. But, if I could trade back, pick up another first in 2022 on top of moving back 4 picks to then pick up the running back that I like better, like that's the value play I see.
But
as far as if you're going to play that running back.
I see what Frank's saying. You can kind of play the stonks here, where you take Najee Harris and you go, okay, I now have Najee Harris, and you wait till week 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, and he's going off for the Steelers. Let's say you could easily then flip him for twice the value of 105, whatever you took him at. So you can easily pick up some value, and I think that's what Frank's trying to say.
Yeah, I agree with both. I agree with you, JT, because I'm not. If there's a good quarterback or a insane receiver, and my team is terrible, or obviously Kyle Pitts, but like if there is a legit monster there, and then there's like a good running back, like maybe you think Najee Harris is the shit, but like you can't argue with me that he's a better prospect than Kyle Pitts at their respective positions. Like, yeah, you take the best player available, but I'm more going off of the do not completely avoid running backs if you're a rebuild team just because they're a running back. Like, you need anything that's good, and best player available is best player available. If that's a running back, it's a running back. Just take the risk. Anything else on running back? I guess I just like running backs because I feel like I can pick up good running backs after the league starts a lot of the time. I can find one in the draft, especially Superflex drafts with the quarterback craze that's going on. And quarterbacks obviously always go pretty high. Like JT said, I landed Javonte in a league at 111. And
that's so low.
And it was one of those leagues where the only running back I took really was Aaron Jones in the 4th round. I took a ton of receivers, and the receiver room is sick. Quarterback room is sick. We got some decent tight ends. And then I went out and traded a first for Josh Jacobs. So now I turned simply just Aaron Jones running back room into now I got Javonte. Now I got Josh Jacobs, a couple running backs that I like. You could probably pick up another running back with a second-round pick. Like, you can find and patch together running backs if you really need to, and a lot of times at a relatively fair price.
I guess my argument to that would be, I think it's much easier to do that than say tight end, where if you're looking for those elite tight ends, you're not going to get them, or quarterback. But I will say wide receiver, it feels way easier to just go out and get the likes of Antonio Brown and So you know what I'm saying? Like,
there's just more wide receivers though, and that's why it gets easy. Because if you're trying to pick up, a wide receiver 3 flex play, that guy might be the third receiver on his own team. So like you can pick up those guys for 3rd round picks, 4th round picks, plus some fab, maybe some minor, prospects that you picked later on in last year's draft. Like there's ways to get those guys just because they're so disposable and there's just so many of them that the market is not as high for them as the case for some of these value play running backs.
Well, also, like, if we remember in the receivers video, I was all like, I like taking a ton of receivers and, like, high-value ones because then you can just go around and then flip them for running backs.
Absolutely.
You can take CeeDee Lamb in the 3rd round of a startup draft. I think he's going 2nd round now. But let's just say, let's just bump back a month ago, and you picked up CeeDee Lamb in the 3rd round. I don't think you'd have a terribly difficult time trading him for an Antonio Gibson or trading him for one of the running backs that goes in the 2nd, like a Nick Chubb. There might be people that would take CeeDee Lamb over Nick Chubb straight
Definitely
up, especially if it's a rebuilding team.
Yeah.
I just think it's running backs. Obviously, the flashy young ones are always going to be expensive, but I really don't think it's as hard as people think it is to pivot into guys like Nick Chubb's, who are elite level running backs, or Aaron Jones's, or whatever's.
Sure, but I do think there is just for one last kind of thing. There is this kind of tier of running backs that I feel like really gross about if I'm trying to like trade into him. I know you said like you like David Montgomery. He might be the only one that I'm like, okay. But you've got Chris Carson around there, Damian Harris, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. These guys I'm all like,
fuck them.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend doing that.
But every single year, there's always a team that's going to be rebuilding that has old running backs. I mean, it's a cycle. It happens to all these teams. Like, maybe in some of your leagues, it's not the current scenario. But I can almost guarantee you that you fast forward to right when your season ends next year, there's a guy's team that didn't do as well as they thought it did. Maybe their Carson Wentz just shit it out, or they had a Deshaun Watson. Then they finished below average in the league. They have like pick 4, and you can go out and take their elite running back with draft capital.
Yeah.
Because that running back is all of a sudden like a Nick Chubb. He's only 3 years in the league. He's got a contract extension, but he's considered old and he's going to age poorly and all that. You can buy him if you need to. And then if you're JT, you still took your DeAndre Swift in round 3 of your startup. So you still had your upside play.